Percent of Canadians especially vulnerable to the virus. This is The National. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has led to street battles and sieges, and tonight, after 6 days of fighting, attacks are reaching into the heart of cities, killing civilians. This is a residential area 140 kilometers west of Kyiv, which the Ukrainian government says was hit by a cruise missile. Emergency crews working feverishly to rescue survivors. The apparent target, a nearby military base, one of at least 3 cities hit by cruise missiles, including the capital. More Ukrainians are fleeing the country as fears grow that Russia is escalating its use of force. And Susan joins us from Western Ukraine as the country braces for more deadly strikes. Susan?
However fast and brutally Russia's president dreamed of bringing Ukraine to its knees, it hasn't worked. Now the Russian military is dug in close to the capital, but paused as air attacks kill more civilians in big cities.
Russia struck at the heart of Ukraine's second largest city, laying waste to Russia's claim it's only targeting military sites. At least 10 civilians were killed in the missile attack on a Soviet-style government building. And more casualties, an air attack ripping open an apartment complex. President Zelensky spoke passionately via video link to the European Parliament, bringing even the translator to tears.
We are fighting just for our land and for our freedom, despite the fact that all large cities of our country are now blocked. Nobody's going to break us. We're strong. We're Ukrainians.
He got a standing ovation from politicians clearly moved. But a menacing convoy of Russian tanks and military vehicles continues to slowly advance towards the capital, Kyiv. As a prelude, maybe, a precision strike on Kyiv's central TV tower, killing 5. Military analysts believe it was strategic, targeting communications in advance of a massive attack on the capital. Kyiv streets were mostly empty, residents sheltering in place with just air raid sirens piercing the silence. Some lined up for groceries, preparing for the unthinkable. We are all united. We have to help each other. That spirit echoes in Western Ukraine, outside Lviv, at a self-made blockade. With an axe and a bat, a group of men are patrolling a side road off the highway. Are you scared, worried?
Ні.
No.
No, не страшно.
I'm not scared. We're not afraid. We're Ukrainians. Are you strong?
Сильні, сильні.
Strong. Strong. Ukraine is strong.
Putin? Putin?
They swear.
Susan, Western Ukraine has been spared the worst of the fighting so far. What's the feeling from the people that you've spoken to?
Well, what's changed is, nearly a week ago when this multi-pronged attack first was launched, they were terrified here. Everybody in the country was. But now they say they believe the great Russian bear has also been wounded. And now they're fighting back. One man on a blockade today told me he's fighting to stave off a Soviet Union version 2 in his home, which is leaning westwards now towards Europe.
Susan Ormiston in Lviv, Ukraine tonight. Thank you. And that fight will be a fierce one as the massive Russian force continues to advance into the country, closing in on Kyiv. David Common is with us again tonight to zoom out and take us through Russia's military move.
And Ian, let's start tonight with that Russian convoy. Troops, tanks, rockets, missiles, supplies, about 65 kilometers long, moving slowly the last couple of days as the Russians have retooled their strategy. As of Tuesday afternoon, it had reached, you'll see it here in a moment, Hostomel there, just above Kyiv. All of this area now under Russian control. The leading edge of that convoy is driving into this. The Ukrainians have been attacking from the air and ground. Thousands of sophisticated American and British anti-tank weapons have also now arrived. soldiers can fire those off their shoulder. Canada is sending weapons, but they're a bit delayed in arriving. Ukrainian air power has been substantially destroyed. Many Western observers now expect the Kremlin will intensify attacks on cities using missiles, rockets, and artillery fired from afar. Meanwhile, Britain's military assesses the cities of Kharkiv, Kherson, and Mariupol are now encircled by the Russians. Now, they may not go into all of those cities. Instead, they may try to starve them into submission. That tactic is considered a war crime. They may also try to cut off Kyiv, while Russian warplanes would target supplies, including Western-donated weapons, to stop them from getting from border areas into the cities. Ukrainians themselves continue to try to block the invasion, quite literally. And considering their army is 4 times smaller than the Russians, they have not buckled in the opening days as perhaps the Kremlin expected. So the Russians are changing tact. They deny targeting densely populated residential areas, but that is what is now being hit. We may be at the precipice of a new chapter, maybe a prolonged conflict, an insurgency under occupation. Before that, and soon, we seem likely to see heavy, ongoing bombardments with everything that that entails. Ian.
David, thank you. As the fighting and bombing in Ukraine gets more intense, people continue to flee to neighboring countries. And Adrienne is in Warsaw, Poland. Tonight, Adrienne, you're starting to see firsthand the growing refugee crisis there.
Yeah, hi, good evening, Ian. You're right, it's playing out in all sorts of ways, all sorts of places. This is central Warsaw. Behind me is the train station, one of them. Just over here is a bus station. If you spend any amount of time here, you see these waves of people coming throughout the night. The volunteers who are here, who are handing out, they're handing out water, they're handing out clothing, are telling us that they are expecting around 50,000 people to come into Poland today alone. This country has received the bulk of the some 670,000 people who have left Ukraine over the course of just the last week. When you look at the people who are coming and going, and you just never know when you're going to see them, but you see a lot of children and a lot of women. We know what that is about. We know that the men of fighting age have to stay, but you also do not see a lot of elderly people. And that's interesting because Ukraine, like Canada, is a country that has an older population, which means a lot of people are being forced to do some very difficult goodbyes, leaving behind parents and grandparents, people who are frail, who have mobility issues, who just cannot handle these terrible weights across the border. The trip for many people to get to this point began in Kyiv. The train station there is now just a sea of worried faces. Others are crossing by road. This is Svetlana. She made it to Hungary with her 2-year-old, but not with her husband.
My husband can drive, but he stays. Yes, because... Yes.
Not everyone at the borders is saying that they're being treated equally. Foreign students are finding escape especially hard.
Mostly they would consider white people first.
We went to the train station and they will not let us in. And when they did let us in, they were like, you have to give us money because this is not for free for you because you're foreign.
All the border countries are bracing at this point for an estimate of maybe 4 million people crossing, all those people fleeing the invasion. The aid workers who are here are saying that they're very much in a triage situation. So you have to get people food, you have to get them water, you have to get them immediate shelter. And they're starting to be worried about the wounded. What do you do about the people who are being hurt in all these attacks? Poland is actually preparing a medical train right now to try to get as many people from the border area into hospitals as they can. And then comes the really difficult question. No one who flees war wants to do anything other than go home, but some people are going to have to consider living somewhere else for potentially quite a long time. So this is where other countries, Canada included, are starting to have conversations about resettlements. This has all happened very fast, Ian.
You're in central Warsaw tonight, and we'll be hearing a lot more from you tomorrow. Thanks, Adrienne. Let's go now to Washington and a moment of political unity over Ukraine at tonight's State of the Union address. Let's take a look now, a live look of Washington, and where, of course, we are waiting for that very pivotal speech by the President of the United States. We have been told for a day or so that the war in Ukraine will be the major topic. Katie Simpson is at the Capitol tonight. Katie, the speech about to get underway. The White House saying Ukraine will be a big topic.
Ian, this is a moment where Joe Biden needs to convince anxious Americans and anxious allies that democracy can and will succeed. This is a moment unlike any other in modern history. Russia threatening to use nuclear weapons, invading a sovereign country, trying to wipe out Ukraine's elected government. The stakes could not be higher, and the way the West responds will determine the outcome of history. That is the backdrop for tonight's State of the Union address. President Joe Biden is going to highlight the cooperation between international allies while asking for more help here at home, asking for lawmakers to pass more legislation, more aid packages, including weapons for Ukraine. He's also going to announce that Russian aircraft will be banned from American airspace. Now, Americans largely, they are outraged and horrified by the actions of President Vladimir Putin. So selling this to an American audience isn't going to be very difficult. However, Biden is going to warn this comes with a cost. Gas prices, food prices, they will likely go up as more Western sanctions are imposed on Russia. Now, it's important to point out that here in the United States, President Joe Biden is really unpopular. And there's a lot of anger and frustration directed towards the Biden administration right now for a whole range of reasons. But at the top of that list, it's inflation. Biden will try to address that challenge tonight, pointing to his Buy American protectionist agenda to create more manufacturing jobs in the United States. Canada is not going to like what he has to say about that. But for Biden right now, that's not his focus. He needs to build unity in the United States even before what happened in Ukraine. And now he has this added pressure to build support among international allies as America and the world faces this challenge to democracy.
All right, Katie, we'll check back with you next hour. Katie Simpson in Washington at the Capitol tonight. In Europe, an incredible show of unity as leaders support Ukraine and try to shame Russia. But Ukrainian's president says he needs more and fast. Salima Shivji has its plea for help.
The crowds converge outside the symbol of Europe's unity to call for even more solidarity. Inside the European Parliament, draped in Ukraine's colors, a long-standing ovation for the country's president, who had a passionate plea that Ukraine be accepted into the European Union fast. Prove that you will not let us go, that you stand by us, Volodymyr Zelensky said. Europe, once splintered, now steadfast.
If Putin was seeking to divide the European Union, to weaken NATO, and to break the international community, he has achieved exactly the opposite. We are more united than ever.
Hundreds of kilometers away, thinly veiled anger rippled through the United Nations, diplomats walking out rather than listen to Russia's foreign minister. Not quite what Putin intended. Instead of exploiting division, Russia's actions have done the opposite. NATO troops poised and deploying to Ukraine's neighbors.
Hello.
Boris Johnson, visiting a base in Estonia, is firmly on side. The scars of a bitter Brexit fight, unimportant in the face of war.
If Vladimir Putin thinks he's going to push NATO back by what he's doing, he's gravely mistaken.
For experts on the makeup of the European Union, this was to be expected, a knee-jerk reaction in the face of an existential crisis.
That's the EU. They're always fighting each other over something. But whenever they're attacked from the outside, they come together and then push to fight for their survival.
But the momentum of now, propelled by protest after protest in support of Ukraine, may grind into the slow machinery of the EU. Today's vote to work towards bringing Ukraine into the Union's fold could take years to become a reality. Salima Shivji, CBC News, London.
The Canadian government stepped up its support for Ukraine today, while also moving to further isolate Russia. For Ukraine, Ottawa pledged $100 million in new humanitarian assistance. The government says the money will go towards emergency medical care as well as life-saving supplies for people forced to flee. Canada today also imposing new sanctions on several top Russian officials. It banned Russian-owned and registered ships from entering Canadian waters, and it warned more measures are coming.
President Putin has made a grave and historic error. The free world is united in our conviction that his brutal assault on democracy, on the rules-based international order, and on the people of Ukraine cannot be allowed to succeed.
With a list of punishing sanctions growing by the day, Russia is feeling the pain economically. And it's not just the banks and the oligarchs. As Nisha Patel explains, the wider population is also feeling the impact.
We are prepared to do what it takes to degrade the Russian economy.
In a rare move, the European Union moved to block 7 banks from SWIFT, a major messaging service used to receive payments.
It's meant to provide a lot of hardship, limit access to capital.
After sanctions on the central bank sent the ruble cratering, millions of Russians are starting to feel the effects, many searching for hard currency in dollars or euros. Those consequences are very unpleasant indeed, says this Russian. And while that may create pressure on Putin at home, the Kremlin says it has enough resources to weather the economic storm. Though today Putin banned cash exports from Russia exceeding $10,000. The number of businesses exiting Russia is growing by the hour. Shipping giants have suspended orders to and from ports. FedEx and UPS will halt deliveries. Big oil firms are dumping their projects, losing billions in the process. Visa and MasterCard have blocked services to Russian banks. And Apple says it's halting sales in Russia.
This is going to be more difficult to do business in Russia for the next several years, even if there's a path to de-escalation and sanctions being lifted, and that's a big if right now.
So far, the sanctions have avoided targeting Russian oil and gas because it would hurt the European nations that depend on those supplies.
The challenge is that it's not really easy to do given Russia's large stake in the global energy markets.
It all adds up to a Russia that is more isolated.
If you back Russia into too tight a corner, you increase the risk that Putin may respond in a non-economic way.
And that's a path that is to be avoided at all costs. Nisha Patel, CBC News, Toronto.
It is an isolating feeling, too, for Russians living in Canada, watching the war unfold from afar. Complicating matters, many have friends and family in both countries. Julie Wong has some of their stories.
For days, Svetlana Koshkareva and her husband Alexander have been glued to a live stream showing scenes from Ukraine. Koshkareva moved from Russia to Canada in 2013. She has relatives in Ukraine. The invasion of that country is difficult to process.
We are feeling like one part of our body, like let's say your hand or your head, fighting with another part of your body.
Koshkareva is against the military action, but there's no consensus with family back home.
My mom, she's supporting this. She's supporting this war. It's just a huge feeling of shame.
Putin is not Russia!
The shame so great, the Edmonton woman burned her Russian passport at a protest recently. These burnt remnants are all she has left. Koshkareva says she has no plans to go back.
I have to do something to show people how I'm feeling about the government.
Anton Mosinov moved to Canada from St. Petersburg about 10 years ago. The 31-year-old supports Ukraine and a free Russia.
There's many democratic-thinking Russians who are risking their lives, like who are risking everything because they want freedom for their country.
It's a complicated range of emotions for Margarita Ellert. Ellert hails from Russia, but is also half Ukrainian.
We're all very scared, and we thought this is a horrible violation of human rights.
The Toronto woman has attended protests in Canada and is proud of the anti-war protests in Russia, but says she has to be mindful of potentially heated conversations.
See, a lot of people in Ukraine are very angry at Russians for fully understandable reasons, and I just try to approach them with compassion and understanding.
A reminder that many are struggling with a war that, right now, has no end in sight. Julia Wong, CBC News, Edmonton.
As hundreds of thousands flee the war zone in Ukraine, tonight some Canadians are heading towards it.
I'm not Ukrainian, but I'm human, and I feel like it's just the right thing to do.
We'll hear from those joining the fight for Ukraine. Also tonight, new audio of the chaos after a gunman began his rampage in Nova Scotia and 3 Mounties tried to hunt him down.
Okay, lots of gunshots in here. 3 gunshots. 2 more gunshots.
Plus, as more provinces lift restrictions, vulnerable Canadians?
It totally fills me with anxiety.
We're back in 2. We are again tonight keeping a close eye on the capital in Ukraine, a city under threat. And we'll hear from someone on the ground in Kyiv in a moment. But first, we want to turn to news here at home. And Alberta First Nation has announced the discovery of what could be as many as 169 graves at a former residential school. The St. Bernard Mission School, northeast of Edmonton, closed decades ago. But as Carolyn Dunn tells us, it leaves behind a painful legacy for members of the Kapawino First Nation.
Even before they started looking, the community of Kapawino First Nation suspected the results would be tragic. Survivors of the St. Bernard Mission School had long told them of horrific abuse and of disappearances and deaths of children.
Our little warriors. Have waited to find them, and now we will ensure they rest in peace.
Using drones and ground-penetrating radar, an archaeological team found what they'd expected. In just 1 acre around the former Catholic-run residential school, they discovered 169 anomalies, consistent with graves. 115 were in the cemetery. It's not clear whether those are unmarked graves of children or adults from the community. There are no records for the 54 suspected graves found outside the cemetery. But Keisha Supernaut, who is leading the investigation, says they are consistent with stories of the survivors of the residential school, including those involving her own family.
I feel the pain of loss of those who should have been my aunties and uncles. Each of these children was a beloved part of a family, and no one has been held accountable for their deaths.
There is much work ahead to confirm whether the findings are in fact graves, including a broader search around the former residential school.
We need to inform and educate the world so this does not happen again. Truth must come before reconciliation can begin.
Even when the truth, they say, reopens painful wounds. Carolyn Dunn, CBC News, Calgary.
Newly released police radio calls from that deadly 2020 rampage in Nova Scotia tell a harrowing tale. Just 3 Mounties up against a mass murderer who was shooting and setting fires all around them. Those recordings were played today at the inquiry into the mass killings, and a warning, there is some strong language. Kayla Hounsell takes us through that deadly night.
I've got a 911 call about a shooting happened over in Portapique.
It is 10:04 p.m. on that terrible Saturday night in April 2020. 911 dispatch tells police a woman says her husband has been shot and there's an RCMP car in the yard. Another caller says her parents have also been shot. Her house lit on fire.
That there's at least a degree of incredulity by the first responders with respect to the nature of the call.
But they quickly hear gunshots and see fire, and there are only 3 officers on the ground.
Everybody please don hard body armor. Okay, lots of gunshots in here. 3 gunshots. 2 more gunshots. We're hearing numerous gunshots. Be very careful bringing your car down here to avoid ambush. Except for I'm on foot.
The officers are referring to the 3 Mounties who were in vehicles and shot and killed in Moncton in 2014.
That would have factored into their tactical decisions to maintain concealment, to not drive the vehicle in where they could be picked off.
The officers are literally running from one call to the next after also learning there are 4 children whose parents have been killed hiding in a basement. They do check on them and know they need to get them out, but then they see someone with a flashlight.
Is anybody else in here with us? If there's anybody else in here with us, identify yourself right fucking now.
It was not a fellow officer nor the suspect, rather a man who had just found his brother dead. Other officers staged at the entrance to the community want to go get the kids, but their supervisor tells them not to.
I only want 1 team in there if we can avoid having anybody else in the crossfire.
The responding officers keep asking.
I don't want them to start that house on fire and those kids be there. Let's get somebody in there.
An officer is eventually given permission to rescue the children. And finally, at 2:38 in the morning, those 3 Mounties who have been on the ground for nearly 5 hours are relieved from duty. Kayla Hounsell, CBC News, Halifax.
As Russia targets major cities in Ukraine, some Canadians are moving towards the war zone.
I'm not Ukrainian, but I'm human. And I feel like it's just the right thing to do.
Next, we'll hear from those leaving this country to join the fight for Ukraine. The grim rescue effort after a deadly Russian missile strike in Ukraine's second largest city. Tuesday, President Zelensky called the blast in Kharkiv's Freedom Square a war crime. And in a rare interview from his bunker, he says Ukraine will not give up the fight.
Because this is our home. Yes, Russia will double up, but take a look at them. Why our men are stronger, more powerful and successful? Because, as I said, we have what we need to protect. And they do not even understand our state. They do not know these streets. They do not know our people, do not understand our philosophy, our aspirations, what type of people we are.
Ukraine's bold defiance in the face of relentless Russian attacks has inspired foreign nationals to go and try and help any way they can, and that includes some Canadians. Ottawa has gone on the record to say that is their choice. Joanna Remiliotis talks to some of the Canadian volunteers rushing into a war zone.
This white tent is where I'm going to be sleeping tonight.
This is the Polish border town of Medyka. It's far from Anthony Walker's suburban home east of Toronto and from his children and wife, who's worried about him going to fight in Ukraine.
A lot of crying. She obviously doesn't want me here, but she understands.
All right, y'all, I'm here in D.C. for the...
Better known for his satirical videos, Walker, who is also a trained medic, is just one of the unexpected volunteers from Canada making their way to a war zone.
I'm not Ukrainian, but I'm human. And I feel like it's just the right thing to do. Humans should naturally help other humans. People message me and respond to my tweets, and they say things like, "You're a hero." And I don't really like that because I'm just doing what I think is the right thing.
Walker may not want to be called a hero, but his idealism and that of others is extraordinary and dangerous.
The reality of going over there is scary, right?
Bryson Woolsey works as a cook in Powell River, British Columbia. He has no military experience, no personal ties to the country, but plans to go to Ukraine and is willing to take up arms if he has to.
I think it's our responsibility, my responsibility, to help those people. If that means sacrificing blood or life to give them that, then I absolutely think that's what I would do.
The impulse to rush into a war may seem reckless, but for others feels inevitable. In Edmonton, volunteers sort emergency supplies to send to Ukraine, but Alexander Sirhan is preparing to go there too. He just moved to Canada from Kyiv a year ago with his mother and sister.
When you're watching news, you can't just sit, at work, at home and feel okay, because it's not okay.
He says as Russia's attacks on Ukraine intensify, the images of injured civilians, especially children, are too devastating to simply watch.
I think I need to go there, maybe not like a soldier, maybe, just to help civilians, because I just feel I need to go there.
This is my wife, Ola. This is Masha.
Nikita Kavalov fled Kharkiv with his family. Ukraine's second largest city is under heavy attack.
It's in shock. I just want to go back at home.
The fact ordinary people are willing to come here, they say, makes them feel less alone.
When someone is on your side, support, it's very important in such situation.
Yeah, it's kind of incredible. So I do believe that those people's help can be really useful.
So we're going to sleep in shifts.
As for Walker, he may be scared.
Anyone that's saying they aren't scared is either lying or stupid.
But says he believes he can help and that he will make it back home. Joanna Remiliotis, CBC News, Toronto.
For those fighting in Ukraine's defense, the size of Russia's forces might seem daunting. Earlier today, I asked David Collinet for his analysis. He's a former Minister of National Defense and chair of the NATO Association of Canada. David, thanks for joining us.
Good to be here, Ian.
What's your assessment of Russia's military strategy to this point?
Well, frankly, it seems that Mr. Putin didn't think that he would actually have to go into battle. I think that he felt that his threats, all the parading of armaments around in Belarus and on Russian territory for days and weeks might cow the Ukrainians and our allies. But that's not the case. So once hostilities started, it seems they lack focus. They're attacking on all fronts. They're not consolidating. Sure, they've got the manpower, But there's a question as to how motivated it is, and then how well oiled the machine is. There are rumors of supply problems. The column that's north of Kyiv, of 40 kilometers, been stuck there for more than a day as a sitting duck for any aerial assets that the Ukrainians have. So it seems to me that the Russians may be improvising.
They do have a lot of firepower if they choose to unleash it from the air, for example, with missiles and airplanes. Do you think the Russian tactics are going to change soon?
Well, I think that they would have hoped that it would have been a quick kill, if you will, that they wouldn't have to use a lot of heavy artillery and aerial bombardment. But as things don't seem to be working, as the Ukrainian forces seem to be much better disciplined, more focused, certainly more committed, then I expect the Russians to up the ante, if you will, and use more belligerent tactics.
And what do you make of the aid, both lethal weaponry and non-lethal aid that countries like Canada and European countries are offering?
Well, it's great. A lot of weaponry got into Ukraine before hostilities started. I question as to how a lot of this is going to actually be able to be delivered, given the Russian advances. Certainly in the western part of Ukraine, Lviv, near the Polish border, I suppose that equipment could get in from that area. But it does concern me that the well-intentioned and correct gifts, if you will, from the West of equipment may not be able to arrive in time.
Well, there's lots here to analyze and look forward to, and I'm sure we'll speak again, David. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ian.
That is the main TV tower in Kyiv, destroyed by a Russian missile strike. Next, we'll hear from a man who remains in the capital with his family right after the break. Welcome back. It has been 6 days now since Russia's invasion. So many have left Kyiv, but millions have stayed, bracing for what might be next. One of those is Ilya Kusa. I spoke to him earlier and got his perspective as a resident and as a political analyst. I know you're a political analyst as well, and I'm sure, like all residents of Kyiv, you are keenly looking for whatever information you can get. How likely do you think it is that the Russians will mount a major aggressive attack on your city?
I think they will. I mean, there is a high risk of that because, first of all, they already encircled Kyiv from 3 directions, from northwest, north, and northeast. Now, there was a huge column, military column, spotted not several hours ago to the northwest of Kyiv. It came from the Belarus border, and also these rocket attacks and heavy artillery that we are now hearing on the outskirts of Kyiv also gives us this perception, and that there is a risk that they would still do one more major assault this time to try to penetrate the city and breach our defenses, because this is very important to them, as I understand, to capture the capital so that to cement this kind of victory which Putin desires very much.
One of the fascinating things about this story is that here our internet connection is so clear, you are so calm, and yet you're talking about these Russian forces just outside your city. How anxious are you tonight?
You're always afraid when you don't control what you see around yourself, so where you're not in control. And of course there is high morale among Ukrainians, and the one thing that this war, and I'm proud of that, brought to Kyiv residents in particular is that it really consolidated the population and really made people super self-organized. And that's what really keeps the morale high, although people are really afraid and anxious and frustrated sometimes about what is happening.
But that huge convoy, even watching it on the news from here, seeing those satellite pictures, it seems so ominous. How does that feel for you?
Well, I mean, we partly got used to living in such atmosphere because, it's like the 6th day, and not for a day there weren't any strikes or explosions or shootings, here in the city, and in my neighborhood included, because we're not that far from the northwestern outskirts, where the first battles for Kyiv occurred on the first day of the invasion, and where Russian forces initially tried to penetrate the city and come to the city, and come to the city center, but they failed to do so. So I mean, everyone is waiting. I would describe this as a feeling of waiting. I don't know if it's correct, but this is how we really feel. We're trying to understand what will happen. Will it happen at night or in the morning? Will Kyiv be closed, for example, by the time the assault happens? What form will this assault take? But I have faith in our armed forces, because I see that they are capable of defending the capital, and so far they were repelling all the attacks that Russian forces were trying to organize during the last days.
Ilya Kusa, thank you very much for speaking with us, and we of course hope you stay safe.
Thank you very much for having me.
Next, we'll turn back to news here at home, with more provinces dropping more COVID restrictions. But first, a show of support for Ukraine at tonight's Winnipeg Jets game against the Montreal Canadiens, a choir performing the Ukrainian anthem. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Jamie Poisson, and tomorrow on CBC's daily news podcast, Front Burner, as the West levies a battery of sanctions against Russia, what effect will it have on the Russian people, and will it do anything to quell Vladimir Putin? Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Major League Baseball has canceled the start of the regular season after it couldn't reach a deal with players. Those players have been locked out since early December. Among the key issues, minimum salaries and bonuses. Opening day was supposed to be March 31st. Alberta has joined Saskatchewan in lifting its COVID mask mandate.
And I have to say, it was a bit odd coming in here not wearing a mask, but it was also pretty awesome.
Premier Jason Kenney says there will be legislation to lift municipal mask bylaws in places like Edmonton. Also gone are limits on indoor and outdoor gatherings and capacity limits on all venues. And in Ontario,
I would anticipate that we will probably open up and reduce masking both in schools as in public at the same time.
while the province waits for scientific guidance, it is removing other restrictions, including capacity and proof of vaccination rules, and that started today. For some people, though, relaxing those rules is bringing more anxiety than comfort. Katie Nicholson looks at the concerns of those living at higher risk.
Kate Buziak has spent far too much time in this room over the last 2 years.
I watched a lot of TV.
Soon, she will finally get back to the programs that made up a huge part of her social life, like her greeting card making group.
Fingers crossed, I hope everything goes okay.
Even though she is at higher risk, living in a congregate setting for people with brain injuries, she's all for a return to normal.
I think the whole thing would be amazing to have people in the same room.
Sherry Pang used to love to go to concerts and hockey games.
When I see games, playing in the States where there are so many crowds, it totally fills me with anxiety.
Despite 4 shots under her belt, she's still at elevated COVID risk because of Crohn's disease.
It can affect the medications we're on. It can cause a flare-up that is really hard to bounce back from.
It's part of the reason she believes Ontario is lifting its vaccine passport requirement too soon.
I do. It hasn't gone away.
Around 14% of Canadians aged 15 or older are immunocompromised, putting them at higher risk of COVID complications.
Reduce the risk of someone.
Doctors hope in the rush to return to normal, the vulnerable aren't forgotten.
Really, the onus is on all of us to kind of help and protect all the people around us, to think about the child that has a stem cell transplant that you want to be able to continue going to school, or the mom that has Crohn's disease.
That's one of the reasons Pang and Buziak plan to stick with masks.
So we'll need spring things.
Distancing and smaller family circles.
I think it's in hand, not well in hand. There's still a lot of work to be done.
And still a little more pandemic life left to live.
Dry flower arrangements.
Oh, that'd be lovely.
Before they can truly feel safe.
Yep.
Katie Nicholson, CBC News, Toronto.
The Queen is back at work after dealing with a mild case of COVID for more than a week. She carried out 2 virtual engagements on Tuesday. Buckingham Palace says the Queen will also take part in some private events. Prince Charles reporting the 95-year-old is doing much better now. Coming up, a close encounter between a polar bear and a dog, and it was caught on tape.
We're all kind of freaking out for a moment, thinking to ourselves, well, what are we going to do?
What happened next? Find out right after this. Polar bear sightings aren't uncommon in Black Tickle, a tiny community located on an island off the Labrador coast. But what surprised one family was a curious polar bear who got a little too close for comfort to their dog. And all of that is our moment.
We were all sat around the kitchen table and we were just, eating away. And my nan here, she walked over towards the kitchen stove. She looked out the window, and she's partially blind in one eye. She looked out the window to look at her dog, Nanook. By chance, she seen something white from the corner of her eye, and she thought to herself, she said, "Oh, what a beautiful white dog." And then it kind of occurred to her that it's winter and that there's no white dogs around here. And so she looked proper. And when she looked, she noticed that it wasn't the dog, it was in fact a polar bear. Nanook, he had never seen a polar bear prior to this encounter. And so he didn't really know what to make of the situation. And so we were very afraid that he would react poorly to the bear and that the bear might harm him in some way. We were all kind of freaking out for a moment, thinking to ourselves, well, what are we going to do? So one of the people in our home, they decided, okay, I'm going to see if I can find a bear banger, which they did. And they shot the bear banger so that he would scare it off. Luckily enough, it did.
So the bear banger, if you live as urban a life as I do and don't actually know what it is, doesn't hurt the bear. They're not allowed to in that community. Supposed to call the rangers to come and deal with the bear, but the bear banger is just an explosive device. I went down a rabbit hole on YouTube just a few minutes ago watching videos of bear bangers. They're kind of cool. That is The National for March the 1st. Good night.